it is the Labour Party Congress. We have seen this morning that they're going to go on the attack. We've heard a coalition of cuts and also the super policy, Dileepa. What do you think about that as a battleground for the election?
It's a bit of a strange policy because it's not necessarily a battleground that people want to discuss. I mean, part of the reason why we've had such difficulty in this debate is that no one actually wants to discuss the superannuation issues, because one of the big problems, I mean, Australia is making changes in this area, because the big issue with superannuation is actually not the people who are retiring, 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's actually people who are going into retirement, in the next few years, who will be living longer. And therefore, in 20, 30 years, we're going to have potentially a big budget problem.
Are you surprised, Mike, that this is what's being wheeled out at the Congress?
No, I'm not that surprised, because I listened very carefully to what Carmel Sepuloni said, and she was also attacking National's reputation of being a better economic manager. They did, in fact, stop payments into the Cullen Fund, which cost us $24 million. So I think that is part of the attack on National. I am, like Dileepa, I'm a bit surprised that superannuation is an issue, because I haven't noticed it as an issue.
It is interesting. Isabel?
I would agree with Mike. I think it's quite a shrewd sort of battleground to take, because it's an opportunity to feed into that rhetoric of this is a coalition of cuts and a reminder of what you lost under a former national government. So perhaps that's more the strategy there.
Yeah. Is it unusual, Mike, to go on the attack at a Congress? I think of these things as quite, inward focused about what we are doing, but this is very much lining up National and ACT.
It is unusual, but I think it's necessary given their position in the polls. But I would make a point that they're not using half the ammunition that's open to them. I mean,
you got some ideas. Well, got a little PowerPoint here.
I'll give you this. This is a report on Brooke Van Velden.
My gosh, yes.
And she says they're going to cut KiwiSaver subsidies, scrap the winter energy payment, lower benefits, put interest back on student loans, and reduce public servant salaries. Well, that is wonderful meal for the Labour Party.
Well, you can take the Labour Party president out of the party, but you can't take it out of the man or something, Mike. Dileepa, it was a bit of a grim week maybe a sobering week for Labour this week with the poll out. Do you think the honeymoon is over for Hipkins?
When you look at some of the polling, or at least, on Business Desk, we have a rolling average of polls, and one thing we noticed was this week was in that rolling average was the first week where this year where Luxon's National has kind of edged ahead. And when you look at those how those averages go out, it's actually a lot of Labour's popularity is sort of going upwards when you have the storm event or the cyclone, and it's sort of trending down. So, but on the other hand, you would say that National, perhaps there's an argument out there that maybe National isn't doing as well as it could have, which has caused some of the other tensions this week, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen Christopher Luxon inch, I think, 1 point higher, which is quite unusual, isn't it? That you have the party doing well, but actually, if it was an election tomorrow, we might have a Prime Minister who's not super popular, Isabel.
No, and it seems like that kind of the notion of Chris Luxon being inexperienced and being a little bit shaky on his feet compared to the political animal that is Chris Hipkins seems to be potentially bedding in a little bit. I mean, Dileepa and I were both at a press conference with Chris Luxon last week, or maybe earlier this week, and he did seem very unnerved by that poll result and, unsettled by it. And then we see him at a public meeting in Birkenhead and potentially just having another whoops moment where he comes out and says the medium density housing rules were, what were his words, not perhaps a mistake. And so maybe a little bit uneasy on his feet coming into an election year and allowing for some easy wins by Labour.
Well, it's very late to be finding your feet, isn't it, Dileepa?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a kind of classic case in point, because it wasn't clear. I mean, if that's a big shift in policy, because they made a big deal of this being a bipartisan accord. So if they're planning to tack away from it, that's not the way that you announce it. So it looked like he accidentally said something, and then they didn't talk about what they meant for a little while, and I guess we'll see in the next few days what that actually means. But and I mean, there were other things that he said in that meeting, I think, around Māori names on signs.
Yes.
And I think that it just looked panicky. I mean, if you want to make a point about this, there's a way of going about going about it. But it looked like he was panicked by the crowd and sort of seemed to make some points that he perhaps didn't mean to say out loud. Or
Which is great for us journalists, but not good if you're wanting to get elected as Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And sort of undermining his deputy, Nicola Willis, who was so instrumental in that bipartisan accord, you know, with Chris Bishop, and then sort of letting that out, kind of. Yeah, you have to think behind the scenes there might be a little bit of tension between Willis
Maybe
and
some
Luxon.
coaching for Christopher Luxon.
And it's not even clear that that was costing them popularity, because all through last year, I mean, this was a position they had and their popularity only rose. So what is the strategy here? I mean, what votes are they trying to get?
I think the danger is that Chris Luxon appears to be trying to secure the 25% of people who vote National anyhow, with the live cattle exports and the housing policy he announced. But I would make a point. What these polls, and there have been several over the last week, Horizon had the Greens and Labor ahead. It's going to be a very near-run thing. So, and under those circumstances, you look at two things. Who's going to shine in the campaign? Now, Helen Clark was the discovery of the campaign in 1996. Didn't win, but she was the discovery of the campaign. Phil Goff flopped. Okay? So did
I remember.
Judith Collins.
Yes.
If Luxon shines in the campaign, he's got a chance. Now, the other thing is who participates. The non-vote varies between 30 and 20%. If it's more like 20 than 30, Labor gets back in.
Yeah.
If it's more like 30 than 20, it's a national government.
Yeah, it is going to be so interesting, a drag race right until the end. And I'm so interested in who's going to stay home too, but we will have to leave that for another day. Thank you so much for joining us on the panel this morning.